Hey folks, Jackdaw here. Much like Victor Frankenstein's fateful experiment, Dragon Age the Veilguard feels like a creation stitched together from the remains of its cancelled iterations. Pieces of a multiplayer corpse over here, EA mandated pivots there, even the lifeblood of Anthem's codebase pulsing through its veins, and a renewed single-player spirit sewn into its core. But just as Frankenstein's monster struggled with its identity, the Veilguard wrestles with its place in the Dragon Age saga. I've finished the game twice now. My first playthrough as a self-insert Morn Watcher warrior was pure dopamine. A rush of lore discoveries, shocking plot twists, and unfiltered joy. Seriously, it was epic, and everything I said in my impressions video reflects the hyperbolic feelings of finally playing a new Dragon Age after a decade of waiting. For my second playthrough, Tivril, a Veil Jumper mage, took the reins, and I have to give a shout out to Bonnie Bryony Corrigan, who delivers a feminine, gruff, emotion-packed performance that stands out as a true highlight.
You mean it's hard not to be lonely when you're a pompous ass?
Her Geordie accent, with its hard-working northern lilt, felt like a piece of home for me, like going out for a night in the Toon. Truly a rare kind of representation that I was so glad to see as a Northern Brit myself. And currently I am streaming my third run weekly, this time as Taylor Swift, a Crow rogue, spreading love and chaos across Thedas. Yet as much as I loved my first playthrough, by the second and third, the cracks started to show. Part of me couldn't help but long for a sequel closer to the grounded tone and narrative depth of Dragon Age Inquisition, and especially the Trespasser DLC.
All of this happened because of fanatics and arguments about the next world. It's time we start believing in this one.
You see, the tone in the Veilguard feels like a departure from what I've come to love about the Dragon Age series. Rook's dialogue is bright, upbeat, and heavy on the heroics. It's fun, and it fits the theme of you as the central hero. And on my first playthrough, I really leaned into that, and I enjoyed being a classic, charming protagonist. But compared to the Inquisitor's subtle, well-timed humour, Rook's frequent quips felt a bit too much. They can be cheesy and campy, leaving little room for nuance, even when you are choosing the more stoic, blunt options. You're still way too optimistic, and this is especially felt on subsequent playthroughs. At times, it feels more like I'm playing Mass Effect Andromeda than Dragon Age, which isn't necessarily bad, but it's not the Dragon Age I fell in love with. And that's one of my biggest frustrations with the Veilguard. It's lost some of that ambiguity and moral complexity that made the series so special. Dragon Age has always been about agency, about characters and worlds that feel alive, like they exist independently of my hero's actions. The writing was beautifully human and layered, full of morally grey areas that left you questioning every single decision. Should I side with Loghain and betray Alistair? Support the Mages or the Templars? Was having an old god baby the right thing to do? Do I dare leave Hawk in the Fade? These choices weren't simple. They weren't just like picking a good or bad path either. They were about wrestling with your own sense of morality in these worlds, and how your companions responded to your specific decisions made it all the more real. It was messy, complicated, and deeply personal. That's why I play Dragon Age, and that's why I know a lot of people in my community play it too. Because no one in real life is entirely good or evil, and that ambiguity in a video game makes everything feel so relatable, so human. Take Solas for example. In Inquisition, he's written with so much care and subtlety. He's ancient, wise, and hell-bent on destroying the Veil, but he's also heartbreakingly human. Despite being an elf, he's lonely and has lost so much. There's really no definitive way to view him, at least in Inquisition. He's not purely a hero or a villain. He's shades of grey, and that's what makes him so compelling. Everyone interprets him so differently because the writing really allows for that. But the Veilguard just doesn't have that same resonance, even for characters like Solas. The morally grey storytelling that defined the series feels watered down. Dialogue spells everything out for you, sometimes 5 times over. Choices, especially in companion questlines, often have an obvious better option. It feels like the game is holding your hand too, and that's a stark contrast to the layered, ambiguous storytelling that again, I fell in love with. That said, there are glimmers of the old Dragon Age here, especially in Emmeric's questline. It's one of the few moments that capture the moral complexity and emotional weight the series is known for. But for the most part, the game opts for a more black and white approach to choices, dialogue, and character arcs, and I really felt the loss of that nuance. As someone whose channel has been built on tinfoil theories and uncovering the layers Dragon Age left for us to interpret, it's really disappointing to see everything pretty much spelt out for you with little room for ambiguity. For example, the companions really don't fight with each other. Sure, Tash calls Emmeric a skull effer, and there is some tension between Lucanus and Davrin, but these so-called party dilemmas are very quickly resolved by Rook having a single chat with them. Where's the conflict that forces these characters to confront their differences, evolve, and rise above, or perhaps even grow that conflict even further? I can't help but think of Cole in Inquisition, one of my absolute favourites as well. His dialogue was never straightforward or spelled out for you. Instead, it was nuanced, cryptic, and open to interpretation. And if you paid attention and dug deep into Cole, you could uncover layers of lore, character motivations, and even hints about the Elven Empire, and of course, Solas. As a spirit, Cole always knew who Solas truly was, and their conversations together reached into deep aspects of Solas's narrative. It was subtle, rich, and most importantly, it respected our intelligence to piece it all together. On top of that, Cole wasn't universally liked, even among the Inquisition's party. His presence caused tension and confrontation. That ambiguity, having a character in your group who was misunderstood or even disliked, it added so much depth to the narrative and the relationships within the party. Iron Bull feared him, Vivienne thought he was a demon, and Varric had sympathy for him. In the Veilguard, that kind of tension between companions is almost non-existent, and the developers have since excused this by saying the world's current state is too dire for anyone to fall out. But honestly, conflict is where some of the best character developments happen. Without it, the party dynamics feel flat. And I miss the messiness of characters who don't automatically get along. Think of Varric and Cassandra's rough start where they literally have a fight, or Anders and Fenris who hated each other so palpably. Alistair and Morrigan in Origins constantly snipping away at each other, only to then have them potentially culminate in a literal old god baby. Those moments of conflict weren't just entertaining, but they drove character arcs, pushed the story forward, and gave the relationships depth. Again, that human touch. And in the Veilguard, everyone just kind of gets along. It's way too neat, too easy, and it leaves a gaping hole where conflict and rising action should be. That absence makes the party feel less alive, less real, and ultimately, unfortunately, less memorable. Dragon Age has always thrived on its imperfect characters and the drama that arises from throwing them all together. Without that, the relationships feel like a shadow of what they could have been. And the real frustrating part about this is the potential is there. I love the Veilguard companions. Each of them have so much to offer with their unique characteristics and plot hooks. Lucanus being an abomination, Harding's relentless search for the Titans, and Emmeric's fear of death, despite being a death mage. They're all fascinating concepts that could have been explored to incredible depths. And at some points their dynamics do hit hard in key moments, but for the most part their plotlines and developments, aside from Emmeric's, fall disappointingly flat for the most part. Take Lucanus for example. On my first playthrough, I chose to save Docktown. After I did that, all the content involving Lucanus and Spite essentially just disappeared. Lucanus said he was later on going to then get rid of Spite for good, and that was it. No follow-up, no questline, no resolution, no satisfying payoff for his entire drama and motivation within the party. His story literally just got swept under the rug. It's like there was a setup there, and it just disappeared. And what makes this even more frustrating is it's not like the team didn't have the resources to flesh out these plot lines. They clearly did, because case in point, we got like 5 fully animated picnic scenes with Davrin. Those scenes were cute and fun, added a bit of levity to the narrative, but they felt so shallow and unnecessary when compared to the depths that Lucanus' storyline should have had. Another example, Harding's entire camping trip. So Harding plans an outing either with Rook or Emmerich to Ferelden, a country that in the Veilguard is currently overrun with darkspawn and in complete disarray. And yet Harding, who is from Ferelden, who has family living in the hinterlands, is as cheerful and carefree as ever. There is no hint of sadness, no concern for her homeland or her loved ones, no weight to that moment, just pure good vibes as she goes for a little camping trip, which really just comes across as painfully tone deaf. To contrast this, in Mass Effect 3, remember how Liara reacted to the fall of her homeworld? That moment had so much emotional weight. It carried stakes and consequences that grounded the story in the overall larger conflict. Where is that same emotional reactivity here? How can the stakes of the world-ending conflict feel real when our companions are off camping seemingly unbothered, and the only way we experience that narrative is through letters sent by our Inquisitor? I get it. It's most definitely the writers compensating because codex entries are written towards the end of the project, but that should have been a huge moment in Harding's narrative, as well as spread across the other characters who have relations to the south. But nope. And this is where the Veilguard falls short for me. I wanted to feel the tension, the consequences, the emotional toll of this war from the very beginning. Not just in the final mission, which is absolutely brilliant and beautiful and very, very well done, but moments like this, the hard-hitting ones, and that emotional resonance need to ground the story earlier on, giving the characters more depth and showing how this war impacts them personally. Instead, we get surface-level interactions that do not match the gravity of the situation. And in that regard, it's hard not to feel like the Veilguard is the product of a much grander vision that was ultimately cut down to meet the reality of shipping a minimum viable product. So much of the game feels like it was meant to be bigger, deeper, more ambitious, but the compromises made along the way are evident. Another example, Solas's redemption ending. Standout moment, one of the most beautiful things about this game, truly loved it.
The things that I have done.
With Morrigan and the Inquisitor both attempting to sway Solas from his destructive plans. Ultimately though, it was Mafal who broke his chains, a final paradoxical act of freedom from the cycle she herself set in motion. And through Solas's memories, we learn that he was once a spirit bound to a physical form to serve Mafal. Her guidance shaped him, but so did the control she held over him, planting the seeds of the pride and regret that would eventually lead him down the path of the Dread Wolf. It was such a fascinating story, especially seeing how far Solas was willing to go for Llewellyn, even by giving up his godhood. Yet even in his love for her, he remained tethered to Mafal and the unresolved regrets that dictated his destiny. And so his redemption then didn't come from Llewellyn's love alone, but from Mafal's final release, her undoing of the bonds that she first created. And I loved this aspect, especially having Mafal's input there. I also like the fact that it just wasn't a simplistic love saves the day trope, with Llewellyn coming in at the last second and saving Solas from himself. But in the same breath, I can't help but feel like Mafal's character was retconned in some way. The whole reckoning that will shake the very heavens, what happened to that? Now she's dead, living on through Morrigan, with the Executors positioned as the next big threat. What happened to her grand plan? There was so much foreshadowing, so many hints that Mafal had a larger role to play, and yet it feels like her arc has been sidelined. Unless Morrigan comes back in Dragon Age 5 with Mafal's original intentions, it seems like the story of the Elven Gods is completely over. And for what? Yes, Mafal saved Solas in the end, but then she's like collected the old god souls, and that endgame is just not answered. So much build up for what feels like an unresolved payoff. But this, like so many other aspects of the game, tie back to its Frankensteined nature. The lack of a cohesive identity, the divisive design choices, the content cuts, the lighter tone, the action-orientated combat, the art style, and the streamlined, non-existent RPG elements. It all feels like, unfortunately, a product of compromise. And it leaves me wondering, who was this game really made for? At first, in my impressions video, I really thought it was targeted at hardcore fans like myself. Given the sheer number of cameos and the resolution of so many plot threads from previous games and even To Winter Nights, a book that came out literally 4 years ago. But then the gameplay takes a sharper turn, with combat that's more mainstreamed and action focused, dialogue that's more modern and less nuanced, and mechanics that feel more like Mass Effect than Dragon Age. It's like the game is trying to be two things at once, a love letter to long-time fans while also appealing to a broader, more casual audience. In trying to satisfy both, it ends up feeling like it doesn't fully commit to either. The safer design choices, like the streamlined dialogue and combat, strip away some of the unique identity that Dragon Age has always had, and the experimental elements that do remain don't always feel symbolic of what makes this series so great. In its effort to balance out new and old, the Veilguard becomes a product of its divided development, a game stitched together from conflicting visions, catering to multiple audiences but never quite settling on one. Let me be clear, I'm not saying all of this because I don't like the game, it's quite the opposite. I love the game, and if I didn't care, I wouldn't be so passionate. This game means so much to me, and I understand why it is the way it is. It's a product of 10 years of development, a rollercoaster of EA mandates and BioWare pivots. At one point, EA wanted it to be live service, so the team planned for that. Then it was supposed to be multiplayer. It wasn't until the success of Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order that BioWare regained control and were allowed to pivot back to a single player focus. The fact that the team managed to create something this polished and cohesive after all those changes is nothing short of miraculous. I said in my impressions video that the Veilguard surpassed my expectations, and I stand by that still. In the end, the Veilguard stands as a Frankensteined creation. A little messy, a little imperfect, but undeniably full of heart. It's alive, and for all of its flaws, that is something to celebrate. Let me know all of your thoughts on the Veilguard down below. What did you think of it? What are your thoughts on my criticisms? Would love to hear what you're thinking down below. Of course, for the latest on this game and the future of BioWare, you are already in the right place. Until the next one, I have been Jackdaw, and I should go. Whoa, 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 whoa.